Fantastic. So thanks everyone for coming along this morning and investing your time. For me, it is about an investment of your time. So I want to make sure that over the next 45 minutes, we're going to cover quite a bit of ground. Should be quite action packed, but you get a return on your investment and get some actions that you can take away that's going to make a difference potentially to your business or your life. So what we're going to have a look at this morning is the 6 steps to get massive results from your business. And all your own performance. If you're self-employed, it's just on your own. The same principles will apply so that you can actually start to look at how you can get great results and growth for you and your business. And ultimately, if it is a business, how we can build that so it will work without you. We'll then look at a really powerful formula as to how you can structure growth within your business and from your activities. But I think, the first thing I just wanted to touch on the fact that, we need growth. If we don't have growth, then if we're not growing, we're dying. So it's very, very important we get a growth mentality and think about a growth trajectory. And for me, it's very important to think around 90-day planning cycles. And each quarter, we've got strategies, and we'll talk about these a bit more this morning in terms of some of the formulas you can use to get that sort of consistent, steady growth so that you're always growing. And, we have to be realistic at the moment. The world has changed. In terms of Action Coach, we've sort of dubbed this, if you like, BCAC, so before Corona, after Corona. But, these principles and what we're about to go through this morning are equally as valid. And, for some businesses, they have changed, they have pivoted, things have been doing differently, but we have to embrace that and build those into our strategies as we move forward, because we are expecting, based on Bank of England information, significant growth once these restrictions are lifted on the 19th of July. So we need to prepare ourselves for these so we can launch ourselves forward and make the most of these opportunities. So just briefly, my name's Rod Fuller. I'm an action coach based up in Mansfield, here in Mansfield. And, it's my pleasure to be able to be your coach for the next sort of 45 minutes. What I want you to do to get out of today, hopefully there'll be some great learnings. Maybe have a bit of fun along the way. This needs to be entertaining. There will be some strategies and key actions that you might be able to take. What I do suggest, if there are actions, I would encourage you, red pen is a great color to write actions in, or certainly highlight or asterisk anything. And maybe you want to ask a question. There will be an opportunity to book one-to-ones at the end of this presentation. So maybe you want to carry some of those actions forwards into that conversation. So sit back, enjoy yourself, and let's see what we can add value to your businesses in the next 45 minutes. One thing I just want to start with before we sort of get into the numbers side of the business and the strategies for business is a bit about a mindset and how we approach things. And there's a concept or generalized principle that we talk about, and we call it the point of power. So at any particular point in time, there may be a situation arises. There may be a problem, something's happened, and you have a decision at that point as to how you react and in which direction you go. And what I mean by that is you can go what we call below that point of power. Some people refer to this as below the line. And there you'll come up with a blame or maybe an excuse or even be in denial in terms of the situation or the problem actually existing. The other way that you can take, or the other direction you can go, is in the green direction above the point of power. And here it's about taking responsibility, maybe for your own actions, maybe for those of others, but then being accountable and taking ownership for the situation. So people that tend to be below the line in terms of that, or below that point of power, the acronym is we stay in bed. We're blaming, we're excuse, denial. Whereas what we need to be doing is taking that responsibility, being accountable, and taking ownership. It's your business. In terms of ownership, if you were to take the letters E and R out of the word, you'd have ownership. It's your ship, you own it, you're in control of where you're taking it. So an example of this might be, you were late for a meeting. That's the point at which you've got power. So you've got two options. You can say, I'm sorry, I was late for the meeting. The traffic was bad, blame the traffic, or I'm sorry, I was late for the meeting. I didn't leave early enough, taking responsibility. And it's you have the choice as to which response you have. Generally, if people spend 80% of their time in the green zone, taking that responsibility, they're going to be a lot more successful. And we all go below that point from time to time and we find ourselves blaming, but it's that, do you find yourself consistently doing that? And if you do, maybe you want to have a think about how you can change that behavior around and take that responsibility and accountability in order it to be successful. So when it comes to business, with an Action Coach, our definition of a business is a commercial profitable enterprise So we need to have, a business that is commercial. We're selling or providing products or services that the market wants, that is going to be profitable. We can make money from it. But ultimately what we want to do is get a business that works without you. Why do we want to do that? Well, it actually gives you, as the owner of the business, choices. It doesn't mean that you have to stop work. I have talked to one or two people recently and they're like, well, I don't want the business to work completely without me. I still want to work. That's fine. But if you have a business that can get to this position, then you have choices. And we'll talk about those in a minute and what that could actually mean to you. So we have the 6 steps, which actually helps build the business and gives a framework in order us to achieve these massive results and actually get the business working without you. So we'll go through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. The main focus of this morning for you, because I want to concentrate the real learnings, is around mastery, niche, leverage, and team. So we'll delve into those areas a little bit more in a minute and just give you a bit more of an idea, the sort of things that you need to be thinking about in order to build the business and how your operations, so that ultimately you've got a great business that will work without you. So mastery. Some people say it's chaos to control is a term that we use with an action coach. For me, it's more about stability. It's the building foundations for which we can nearly launch the growth within our business. So what do we need to have in terms of our mastery in order to have that solid foundation, to have the stability to grow? So the first area within mastery that I just want to touch on is what we call destination mastery. So this is, do you have the end in mind? What's the purpose that you've gone into business? Michael E. Gerber has written a book called The E-Myth. Well, it's actually now The E-Myth Revisited, which is really worth reading. And it's about thinking about where is your business going? Do you have clarity as to where it will be when you're finished? You'll see on the slide here, we've got a picture of a mountain with a flag at the top. So what's your vision? What's the top of the mountain that you want to aspire to for your business? It might be a level of turnover. It might be market share. It might be something broader in terms of providing, the mission for Action Coach is world abundance through business re-education. So quite a broad vision, but it's, where is it you want to get to? The road up the mountain is your mission, how we're going to get there, the type of how we're going to act as a business, who we're going to interact with as customers. And then it was part of this process. Once the business starts to grow, we will need to think about our culture, because as we scale the business, the culture in terms of the people we want to take with us becomes very, very important. So in destination mastery, and you may want to score yourself out of 10 as we go through these next few sections, is, the sort of questions I'd ask is, do you have a plan? Do you have a vision 10, 5, 3, 1 year in terms of where you want to get to? Do you have a detailed plan for the next 12 months? Is it in your head or is it just fantasy? And if there are other people in your business, have you shared that? Because the clearer you are with all of those points, then the better you're going to have in terms of the decision making and the strategies to really focus on your business. So, 10 would be everything's in place, really clear vision, everything documented, got a 10, 5, 3 business plan, everybody knows. 0, it's all in my head, haven't really started yet. So again, be honest with yourself. And the point of this then is that as we write these scores, how do we move them forward in terms of, if you ask, maybe you scored yourself a 3, how do we move to a 4 or 5, and then certainly move higher along? Because if we're not clear in terms of our destination mastery, what tends to happen is that this happens. What direction is your business heading? And I tend to find working with clients, without that clarity, sometimes it's over there, sometimes it's, nowhere. Some people aren't really sure. They've just gone into business thinking, well, I'll just do this because it's the job that I had and I think I can make a go of it. So the more clarity we get in terms of where we want to go and how we're going to get there, the more successful we're likely to be. The other thing that can happen is this, which looks very colorful, but you end up, a lot of businesses, if they don't have that clarity and destination, they end up with this patchwork of the analogy here is a patchwork quilt. So in terms of products and customers, and sometimes what tends to happen is the business just reacts to the customers, the products, and it just starts to evolve, and it looks very nice, but it isn't actually necessarily taking you in a direction, and maybe not the direction you actually wanted to go to when you first started the business. So again, have a think back, reflect on some of those questions within that destination, and maybe score yourself out of 10, and then we can think about how we can move that score forward. The next area that's really important in terms of the foundations of a business is money mastery. And recently, Brad Sugars, who you'll see there on screen, who's the founder of Action Coach, we had a conference, which was an online conference recently, and Brad actually had the opportunity to interview Lord Sugar. And right at the end of that interview, he said to Lord Sugar, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to entrepreneurs or people going into business? And Lord Sugar said, know your numbers. If possible, have a weekly profit and loss account, certainly monthly. Know how much profit you're making, because ultimately the language of business is numbers. So we need to understand the numbers within our business so we can make objective decisions. So just a couple of things I wanted to touch on this morning, just to have a think about in terms of some of these numbers. The slide's a little bit busy. Don't worry too much about the lines. I'll explain those in a minute. But the concept is, do you know your break-even point? Because within a business, we have an element of fixed costs. That's the red line you'll see on the screen. And fixed costs are, if you don't switch the lights on, you've got to pay these costs anyway. So if you don't sell anything, you don't do anything during a month, what costs do I actually have to pay out on my business? It might be phone costs, it might be some rent, there might be some insurance, there might be some salaries. These are costs that you'll have to pay out whether or not you sell anything. So it's getting an understanding of what they are. Then the next most important thing is to say, well, when I'm making sales, what are my variable costs that I actually incur when I make a sale? So that might be, if you're selling products, it could be packaging, it could be shipping, and it's the cost of the product itself. So what margin am I left? Because if I understand that, then I know how much I need to sell at that margin to make sure I'm covering my costs every month. So really important calculation to do. If my fixed costs were 5,000 a month, and I was selling £20,000 of sales at 50% margin, that's £10,000 gross profit, I would be breaking even. Anything above that, I'm making profit. So, it's understanding how these numbers work within your business. And there's a concept on screen there called maximum utilization. That's sort of, do you understand, at full capacity, how much money could you actually make? Maybe you've got 2 or 3 people that actually do work for you and they work so many hours a week. So what's the maximum income that you could earn for your business? So it's understanding these sorts of numbers, very, very important as we move forward. The other thing that I want to touch on that's really important within finance, is cash. Ultimately, there's a saying that says sales is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king, or some people say cash is reality. So it's important to understand what's happening within the cash flows within our business. And just want to touch on a concept called the cash gap briefly, because this is actually understanding, well, what happens with cash within our business? How does it flow? Because in this example, what can happen if you're not careful is that if you're buying product, and this example comes into my warehouse on day 0, and it sits in my warehouse for 60 days before I can sell it to a customer. But I have to pay my supplier in 30. So 30 days, I've paid the cash out. The stock then sits for another 30 days in my warehouse, then I sell it. Now, your payment terms might be, you have to pay me in 60 days. And let's hope that, if that's the case, your customer pays you on time. But as you can see from the graphic, that means it's 120 days from when the stock first arrived that you get your cash. In the meantime, after day 30, you've paid for it. So there's 90 days that you've got to run your business, pay overheads, maybe pay yourself until you get that cash in. So it's important to have a think about how that might happen. If you're maybe in construction, it may not be stock, but you might be paying subcontractors, you might be paying design costs, consultants, and building up an element of costs before you can actually put in an application and invoice your customer or your client. So it's really important to think about this. And, on top of that, to really understand this, I strongly recommend for all my clients that we get a cash flow forecast, because we need to know how much cash we're going to have at the end of a period of time in our bank and try and forecast that so we can manage it. So this is just an example of how you could do a 13-week. That's the sort of time frame I would definitely recommend, so that you can say, what's my opening cash balance? What do I think is coming in from the people that owe me money, from what the sales I think I'm going to make? Who do I know I've got to pay? And what payments do I think will be coming up? So what's my cash going to look like? In this particular example, it was just sort of hypothetical one. Week 3, you'll see there's a negative number. We're going to go overdrawn. At least we've now got visibility of that and we can see what to do. In real life, I did this exercise for a client, an engineering client that I was working with. And it turned out at the end of the 13 weeks, this business was going to run out of cash, and they had no idea it was going to happen until we'd actually done this exercise. So what did that enable us to do? It gave us 3 months. Now we had a warning sign that we were going to run out of cash. We could take steps to address that, and we did, and we turned the business around and it, traded very successfully on the back of that. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of understanding, but also setting the goals for your cash. Part of destination is looking where you want to grow, where you want to go to. So what, if you want to have your own personal goals and assets that you want to buy, then the cash forecast is important, because that's where the cash is going to come from for you to afford the things that you want. Maybe it's a new house, maybe it's a new car, maybe it's a holiday now that once things are lifted next year, but you're going to need cash for that. So cash forecast gives you the ability to manage that process. So there's a number of other areas within finance, like KPIs. Do I sort of understand the key numbers that are driving my business? Maybe it's the number of leads coming in. We'll talk about that in a minute. Conversion rate. There might be other statistics, the number of calls you make. Maybe it's the number of appointments. So it's creating a dashboard within finance mastery so that you've got visibility. So again, maybe score yourself, how strong you think you are. 10, all of this is in place. You've got a really good plan. You've got a good forecast. You keep track of it. You've got a cash forecast. 1, you've got a bit of an idea, but again, it gives you a point of reference to say, well, how do I improve my score? Next area of mastery that's really, really important is time. To a certain extent, it's not really time mastery. It's probably self-mastery, because time goes on irrespective. But what we choose to do and where we choose to place ourselves every day and what we do, a lot of it is down to us and how we do that. And it's about productivity. So one great tip to get 25% increase in productivity, this is not just for yourself, this is also for your team, is that the last thing that people should do each day is to do a to-do list for the next day. And write it down, because it gets it out of your head onto a bit of paper. The reason that you can do that, then when you start the next day, you've got a list of all the things you need to do and those that are important that you need to achieve in terms of achieving your goals. And it gives you some clarity, right, I've got this list to do. And also subconsciously, you've already written it down. You've got it out of your head. And I've found sometimes, commuting into the office in the morning, you're thinking about your to-do list and you're starting to think ahead and actually solving some of the questions maybe on that list before you even get there. If you've got members in your team, what's a great thing to do, and even if they're working remotely, get them to fill in an action list for the next day and WhatsApp it to you. Get them into the discipline of doing that. Then you can see where their gaps are, if there are in their diary, but it also focuses where you're spending your time and you'll be a lot more productive. Because ultimately, if we're not careful, and this is a quote by Jim Rohn, either you run the day or the day runs you. So maybe reflect at the moment, which side of that quote are you on? Do you have a degree of control where you're planning and getting the things done that you want to do? Or are you just sort of turning up in the morning, seeing what happens, and actually the day ends up running you? Another concept to think about, and this comes out of a book by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about 4 quadrants. And I think this is a way that I like to present it more as a target, because what we want to be doing is hitting the bullseye. So what do each of these rings represent? Well, during the course of a day, maybe you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. So, we're talking 16 hours during the day. Where do you spend your time? What are the things that you do in that day? So some of the things that you might do are what we call not urgent or not important. And we refer to this as sort of the distraction zone, if you like. So this might be just, making calls you don't really need to. Maybe it's surfing the web, social media. Maybe it's watching sort of TV that's not really relevant, that, you're just filling time. So how much of your day is actually distraction through things that are not urgent and not important? And ideally, we'd like to target 10%. 10% would be the ideal sort of level. If you were to say, okay, 16 hours, 1.6 hours a day, I'm distracted. The next area, things that are urgent, but actually you think might be important. And there may be some emails that you think are important. Maybe it's a meeting that you feel is important and that's urgent. But, the reality is it? Do they really need to be done? Because this is sort of a bit like delusion. So it might be there that we can sort of identify areas where we can save that time. The next area is that's urgent and important. So this is when you're in demand. In our business, we'll need to do quotes for clients. We're going to need to, provide services perhaps. There's going to be issues with staff. So there is stuff on a weekly basis and a day-to-day basis that is urgent and important. But, this is an area that where we're in demand should be around 60% of our time. But ultimately, the place that we really want to get to is the middle. And this is where it's actually not urgent, but really important. Why is it important? Well, it's working on you. This is your health. This is relationships. This is working on the business. This is about creating a future. So working with my clients, ideally, I would like to get to a position, where they're doing 4 hours as a minimum on their business in this zone. But, 20% we can get to would be a day a week. You're in a really strong position because you've minimized the distraction and delusion, and you're really spending that quality time on how you're developing as a person, your self-development, but how you're creating the future for the business. So yeah, that book, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, goes into this in a lot more detail in terms of how you can actually make sure that you're working and hitting that bullseye more often than not. The other area to think about when it comes to time is can you delegate anything? I did an exercise, and a great exercise to do is to say, well, actually, how much revenue am I generating in the business over how many hours? So what's my hourly rate to the business when I'm actually earning money? And I did this exercise with a client yesterday, and it came out that he was working it worked out at £100 an hour. But we then discussed some of where his time was going, and he was spending quite a lot of time on tasks that actually he could delegate, maybe outsource to somebody at £10-12 an hour. So, the decision then is, do I employ someone for 10 hours a week, costs me maybe 120 quid, but those 10 hours, if I can earn £100 an hour, is worth £1,000 to me. So really important to think about where your time's going. And a good way to do that is to start with a time log or a time audit, and actually really analyze your time and be brutally honest and say, right, over a 2-week period, I spend 10 hours on emails. I spend this on maybe 20 hours on phone calls. Where's your time going? Quotations, client meetings. And then you may be able to have a look at that and say, you know what, there's a part of that I can either outsource to free me up to do some other things that add more value, or certainly I could look at some tasks that can be delegated to my team, because delegation is about the growth of the team and others as much as it is of you. So have a think. Maybe there's things there that you can do that. Maybe there's things that you actually want to do, but you don't really need to, which means you're losing time that you could be spending in that zone. Maybe you like raising the invoices, for example, because you love to see the invoices going out for the potential income coming in. But is that something you really do need to do? If that's taking you maybe 3 or 4 hours a week, maybe that's better spent on reading, self-development. Is there other areas that you can do that's going to help grow you in the business? So ultimately, as I mentioned, ideally, we're trying to find between 3 to 5 hours a week initially in that red zone, but growing it up to 20% of your time. And as I mentioned earlier, delegation, it's about letting go so that you can grow and your business can grow, but also it helps your team grow. But make sure there's a concept here that when we delegate, we're not just abdicating. So we're not just passing someone something to do, that actually, if it's been in our head for a period of time, we've documented it into a system or process. This is how we need to do it. Then you can train the person, you can hand it over, and they've got a clear system of what work they need to do, how they need to do it to get the result that you want. Just by handing something over is not necessarily delegation. So just something to be wary of. So once we've got a destination, we've got very clear where we're going. We've looked understanding our numbers. Again, you may want to score yourself out of 10 for time mastery and how effective you really are with your time, and whether you need to actually get on top of that more. Then the last area is delivery mastery. So this is about delivering a consistently great service to our clients. So how are we doing that? Have we got some systems and processes? When we're in mastery, we need to be thinking about, if it's stuff that you're doing as an owner, maybe you're a solopreneur to start with, maybe you're starting to get a couple of people in your team. We need to start thinking about some processes now, maybe some checklists as well, because what we don't want to do is sort of have great service and then it drops down, then it goes up. You probably know from your own experience, if you go and go somewhere and you think, wow, that was fantastic, I really enjoyed that. You go back again and it's not so good. You're thinking, do I go back? Is it something I want to go back to? So in getting that consistent, great service also means we're more likely to have people that then will refer us. If we're relying on referrals as part of our business, giving a great service means we're more likely to get word of mouth referrals coming back to us. So there's a concept, and the word on screen there is consistency. We've got to get that consistency. We're almost better to start at a slightly lower bar in terms of that consistency and raise it up than sort of have spikes in terms of our overall performance. And there's a concept, a guy called Michael Heppel's written a book on 5-star service, and he has this concept of, do you always aim for the wow factor? And the reason for that is he says there are 3 levels of service. Not good enough, and wow, we've got where our expectations have been exceeded. And he said, if you're always aiming for wow and you miss wow, then we're going to be good enough. But if we're only aiming for good enough and we miss good enough, we're not good enough. So it's worth thinking about, where are you aiming your service, and what systems and processes do you have to make sure that you can get that consistency in that service to your prospects and your clients. So that's foundations of mastery. So that will give us our stability. As I say, that, just recapping again, that destination, we've looked at finance, time, and then the delivery. We start to get that right. Then we start to think about how do we start to build consistently cash flow that's more predictable in our business. And we call this niche. So just before we go into a really good formula that's going to show us how we can grow that cash flow, just want to touch on the fact that our definition in terms of Action Coach of niche is no price competition. Because if we're in a market where there's lots of comparisons and people doing similar things, we're competing, very, very difficult to get value. And what you might find is your value is up here, but your price is down here somewhere. And it's important that if we can identify a niche in which we have a unique position, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it means there's less competition, there may be none, and we can get much more value for our services. The opposite of this was a colleague of mine that I used to supply. He had an online Amazon bookshop. And, that's the opposite of this, because on Amazon, the bookshops have software and they monitor everybody else's prices. And as soon as the prices start to drop, the software drops your price. That's a complete opposite. So, that makes it very, very tough. You just got to be very busy and do a lot more than anyone else. So if we can position something that we're doing that is niche, that we've got no real competition, gives us a real advantage. So how do we do that? How can we create a niche? A couple of things to think about is, is there something unique to us that we can actually tell the market that we do? The analogy I use here, if you're driving down the motorway and you look to the side and there's a field and it's full of sheep, you go, well, nothing odd about that. It's a field of sheep. You wouldn't really get on the phone and ring me up and say, Rod, there's a field of sheep. But if the next day you're driving down the motorway and you look and there's that field of sheep and there's a giraffe in the middle of the field, you go, oh my God, there's a giraffe in the middle of look at that giraffe standing out. Rod, you're not going to believe this. So, the reason I use that analogy is I spoke to a company recently, and they were into lettings, and they did a 15-month guarantee. And I said, oh, is that unique to your industry? And he went, well, yeah, there's nobody else locally giving a 15-month guaranteed return on rental income. It's like, well, where's that on your marketing? Because that's your giraffe. If that's going to make you stand out, then it's really, really important. So, and it also then it creates that ability. You're different because you're differentiating yourself from the market. And maybe you need to start narrower. Nike, when it first started out selling shoes, that was very much selling running shoes to people that did 5 to 10K in one university out of the back of a VW van. That was how Nike started. Very niche, very focused. Once that university were buying his shoes, he went to the next one, and the story, it evolved significantly. So have a think about, if you were a giraffe in your industry, what would it need to look like? How can you be different? And if there is something that you are doing that's genuinely unique, are you communicating and making sure that in your marketing, you're educating and communicating that so people are aware? The other thing that we can think about is a guarantee. That can also make us set aside and make us different. How can we do that? Well, think about something that that you may want to be able to guarantee that no one else is. So there was a roofing contractor. This is a great example that we worked with, and they surveyed their customers, and their customers said, well, you never turn up on time. You're always shoddily dressed. You swear on site, and when you leave, the place is a mess. So, and what they were finding is that their average order value was dropping because they were having to discount the value of the projects to actually win the orders. So they put a guarantee together that said, we'll always turn up on time. We'll always be appropriately and smartly dressed. We'll never swear on site. And when we leave, your property will be as tidy or tidier than when we arrived. If we breach any of these, you can choose your own roofing contractor, another roofing contractor of your own choice, and we'll pay to have the job done, finish the job. So, that gave them real focus on quality. They spoke to the subcontractors, said, look, you breach any of these, we're not going to pay you, but we will pay you a bit more now for each job. And what happened? Well, the average order value went up. from about £3,000 to £5,000, but more importantly, their conversion rate went up from 30% to 50%. So out of 10 inquiries, instead of making £4,000, they were making 18. And they then had a unique position where no one else was offering it. It was a point of difference. So very powerful guarantees can be. So it's worth just sort of thinking, is this something that I could do and that I'm prepared to guarantee? And the reality is, because the conversion rate goes up, and in most cases average value of your sale can go up, then you're creating more value that actually, if you did actually fail once maybe and slip up and the guarantee is called, you're still in a much better position than you would have been if you didn't have it in the first place. And with an Action Coach, we have a guarantee which differentiates us from other business coaches in the market, that we do have guarantees over our results. There's a 6-month and a 12-month, depending on which program you're on, to make sure that the investment that you're making is returned. Again, very powerful. That helps us with conversion and helps us differentiate ourselves, in what is quite a crowded market. So the next thing I now want to touch on is this formula for growth that I referred to earlier. So 6 steps gives us a framework in terms of how to grow our business so that it's going to work without us. The formula for growth is what we call 5 ways, and it's very, very powerful. And I think, if anything, do take this away today and think about how you can apply this into your business and the activities you're doing, because it really, really works. So, an analogy here is that the same chassis that's used to build a Volkswagen Golf actually will sits on an Audi R8. So why have I put these on slides today? Not because I just want to have a look at the Audi R8, because it'd be quite cool to have one, but the formula that I'm about to show you is effectively the same chassis. It's a framework that you can apply whether your business is at the stage of a Volkswagen or you want to supercharge it in terms of an R8. Doesn't matter. This formula will provide that chassis for you to build whichever vehicle you want to have. So if you want to have an R8, this will enable you to do that. So how does it work? So 5 ways. Most business owners that I speak to, they tend to know what the number of customers that they've got. That's an important number to know. They tend to know what the sales or revenue is. Some know their profit. Not everybody knows their profit, but generally they'll know roughly how much profit they're making. The key to this is that these 3 items, in terms of customers, revenue, and profit, they are just results or outcomes of other factors. And it's these other factors which gives us the real power in the 5 ways formula. So how does this work, and how can we apply it to you that are here today so you can get some real value? So how the formula works is we look at the number of leads coming into the business, and you need to maybe have a look at how you define that. But leads is marketing. So our marketing activities, whether it's networking, whether it's knocking on doors, maybe in terms of cold or bold calling, whether it's telesales, maybe it's your website. There's different marketing strategies that will generate leads into your business. And then what's your conversion rate? Do you know what it is? If you don't, I suggest it's a big takeaway from today. Calculate from the number of inquiries that you get. Maybe you measure that leads on the number of quotes you send out to prospective clients. What percentage of those then actually buy from me? And then when they're a customer and they're buying from me, on average, how many times do they buy from me? Do they come back? Because this is where we really make money in a business. If we can get customers coming back, then we don't have to remarket to them, and we can, it drives more sales. Then we can look at the average value sale. What is your average? There will be a range, but what on average do people spend with you? Because then how do we drive that average up? And we'll put some numbers in a minute and show you how this can work. And then understanding our profit margins. We talked about that in finance mastery. If we understand what our true margins are, our gross margin and our fixed cost, that'll give us our net margin. Then we can understand how much money we're making. Then that gives us the overall profitability. So if we just run some quick numbers in this, just so you can see how this really works. So if there's 4,000 leads over the course of a year into this business, and we're converting 1 in 4, 25%, we'll have 1,000 customers. If each customer's buying from us twice and they're spending £100 each time, we've got a £200,000 revenue sales business, 25% margin, so we're making £50,000. And it may be that you have another level above leads. You can apply this in a slightly different way. It might be number of calls you make that you convert to a lead. It might be that you have an initial inquiry and then it goes to your lead as a quotation. Again, if you need to measure that, again, you can put a couple of extra layers, that's fine. But, once you get to the definition of a lead, this is a great place to start. So let's assume we can get a 10% increase in each of these areas. With an action coach, we have 300 strategies for each of these blue numbers. So, they're not relevant for every business, but, we can certainly pick out a number of strategies in each area that can help you grow your leads, your number of leads in terms of your marketing. So as I touched on before, it might be you may not be doing any SEO on your website. You may need to invest in some pay-per-click. You may need to look at some email campaign strategies. Maybe you want to go networking that you haven't done before. Maybe you want to look at a referral strategy. Maybe you've got a double hope strategy at the moment. You hope you've done a good job and you hope someone refers you. Maybe you want to be a bit more structured and targeted in terms of generating referrals. So all of these things are different strategies that can help us grow our lead flow, that, in terms of marketing activities. Then we can look at our conversion rate. Well, how can we grow that? Well, we've talked about guarantees. We said guarantee was a great way to increase your conversion rate. Testimonials. When's the last time you had a testimonial? Do you ask for them? And where do you use them in your marketing and your sales process? Because testimonials are a great way to increase your conversion rate. Just monitoring your conversion rate helps. But maybe scripts, maybe looking at how you're taking the customer through a conversation, whether or not you can change something that's going to help. Again, we're looking for small margins in each of these areas. So 10% would give us a 27.5% increase. So now we've got 1,200 customers. So we've not got a 10% increase in customers, we've got a 20%. How do we get people coming back? Well, hopefully we've all got a database of the customers that have already bought from us. That's the first thing. Then we can email them or write to them, call them, ask them to come back. Maybe we want to create a VIP or a members club. If you've been into Costa or Nero, some of those coffee shops, you have the card, buy 10, you get the 11th free. These are all techniques to say, well, how do I get people coming back and spending more often with me? And as I said, that's, really where we start to drive profit, because we don't have to remarket in a way that we do to get a new customer. How do we get our average sale value up? When's the last time we put our pricing up? As I mentioned earlier, if your value that you're giving someone's here and your price is here, we may need to look at moving that price. You may need to create bundles. It might be that you've got an opportunity to increase the average value by bundling something together. Maybe you need to introduce something of higher value. I think Starbucks, you go in there, and I think in America it was $3 or $4 for a coffee, but you could also spend $10,000 on a coffee machine. Why? Because if they're there, somebody will buy it. There's a distribution curve that says there will be people that will buy at either end. So you may be some other products that you can introduce that will help drive that average sale value. So why is this important? Well, now when we look at our revenue number, we've actually driven our sales up 46%. And if we can look at how our profit and our overheads, maybe it's how we're shipping, maybe we can change our distribution, maybe there's some other costs where we're buying product from, maybe we can be efficiency in terms of our productivity with time. But if we can drive our profitability up slightly by another 10%, we've now got £80,000 profit. We've driven a 61% growth in our business. It's a very powerful formula, which I map into and use with all my clients. It's the formula we use for our coaching business in terms of structuring our growth. And the advantage of this formula is you can work backwards. So you can say, I'd love to be earning £100,000 next year. So what does it need to do? What does my margins need to look like? What does my average sale need to do? Where do I need to be in terms of the transactions, conversion rate, leads, in terms of my marketing activity that's going to drive that? So yeah, it's a great way to understand how you can bring growth within your business. And just to show you the analogy in terms of, we've talked about the Volkswagen and the Audi, but, for a bit of fun, if you were to double all these numbers, if you were to double the number of leads to 8,000, my conversion rate to 50%, so all of those blue numbers doubled, I would say to put in the chat box, but, have a think and maybe write down on your pad, on your notebook, what profit you think will fall out at the bottom of this. If all of these numbers would double, just, off the top of your head, how much profit would this business make? Well, let's have a look. See if you got close. 1.6 million. So this is the power, and it may be that you can't do that in a year, probably unlikely. But again, it's around mindset. If I want to have the Audi, I can use this framework or chassis. I can look at a 10% increase and take my business to 86,000, or I can take a 50%, 100% mentality and try and take my business to 1.6 over a period of time. But obviously, you can look at the different numbers and play around with it in terms of the formula, and there's a range in between. So very, very powerful. In terms of looking at how we can get growth going into the future. So once we've got that mastery and stability in our business, You've seen the formula now, 5 ways, really powerful to start looking at how we can get consistency and growth. So we're now knowing that, where our profitability is going to go, and how that cash flow, if we've got all those in place. So now we need to think about leverage and efficiencies within our business. And, this is where we really start to get the commercial profitable enterprise starting to work and potentially working without us. So we're now starting to think about systems. So how do we make our business more systemized? So maybe we've had a few checklists and processes when we're in delivery mastery. Now we need to think about our operations manual or our how-to manual. Eventually, if we're going to sell our business, this is really where the real value is. Because I've had situations in the past with some clients where people have tried to buy their business and given them low offers because the owner is still really integral to the business. There was no operations manual. There wasn't really a lot of systems. And a lot of what happened was still in the owner's head. So this is where if we start to do that, it not only adds value ultimately to your business, but this is where you start to get your time back. Keith Cunningham in the book, A Road Less Stupid, actually said, this systems is the bridge between an operator and an owner. So very much a niche. And when you're in mastery, we're looking at the owner pretty much being in the business, the operator, but you want to become the owner. This is where we now need to think about it. So how do we do that and what does it stand for? So if we think about systems, the acronym that I like to use is saving yourself time, energy, and money. So, what can you do now that's going to do that and achieve that for you? It's as the megaphone there says, it's about less is more. So, how can we do less but get more from it? So the key areas that we'll need to be thinking about, and I'm not going to dig too deep into these today. This is sort of just to give you an overview. But, it's thinking about our testing and measuring. We talked about finance mastery and knowing our numbers. It's more important when we get into systems that we can measure what's happening. With people and education, how do we onboard people? How do we train them? Do we have appraisal systems? Because that's going to become important because we're probably going to have a few more members in the team. Focusing really on our delivery and distribution. Have we got really good measurements to make sure we are delivering a great service? There's a measure that I use with clients called on time, in full, in spec. So OTIFIS. So that, did everybody get everything on time, in full, on spec? That's 1. If one of those 3 tests fail, it's a 0. So, what percentage of your orders are actually doing that, ticking those 3 boxes? So it's really important we start to focus on that. And systems and technology. We've talked about the operations and the how-to manual. And, there's a lot of ways of doing that these days. You can video it. You can create a central Google. One of my clients had a Google Drive with all her staff. She had a shared drive for the processes. How do we place orders with our overseas suppliers? How do we invoice customers? All of these things she started to document and put together and build up. Starting to think about technology, using apps on your phone. There was an engineering business where when they were in the mastery section, there was an admin support lady, looked after about 4 or 5 of their engineers because there were manual job cards. So there was a lot of manual processes in terms of paperwork. When they started to grow, they invested in app technology. So job cards were actually sent to them on their phone. They could log in, record hours, take pictures, all of that information. And suddenly that one person could now manage 20 engineers. So that's a good example of how we're starting to think of systems and technology to make our business much more efficient. And if we can get to a position where we're 80-20, that's that Pareto law, so if we can systemize 80% of the business and have 20% being human, we're going to be in a really strong position to really grow and move forward. Because ultimately, if we can get great systems to run the business, then we can get our teams to run those systems. That means we lead our team and we get to the next level and we have a really great business. So once we've got thinking of systems and processes, how are we starting to do that? It's really important we think about the team, because ultimately the growth of a business will only be to the level of the team. So if your team is taking the business so far, you want to go further. I'm having this discussion with a few clients at the moment. They've had reasonable growth. We've got a really good goal to treble the business. Then is that team now capable of that it's got me here going to that next level? And how do we structure that and make sure that happens? Because if the team's reached its ceiling, then your business and its growth has reached its ceiling. This is part of the journey of the owner. As you grow as an owner, the business will start to grow, but there's only so much of you. When you start to grow the business and bring other team members in to get growth, you've got to keep that momentum. So how do we do that? So we need to think about, this scenario where as an owner, you are building the team. So it's your role then, as you start to step up out of leverage and systems, to be thinking, right, I'm now an owner. I need to make sure I've got the right team in place. Maybe it's an operations manager. Maybe it's a finance manager. Maybe now you've got somebody looking after sales or marketing. So what does that team look like? And are you actually giving them the right levels of leadership? And we'll talk about the keys to a winning team in a minute. But that's then becomes your role as the owner. Then you've got a great team. The team can look after the customers can look after the business looks after you, the owner, and then you can reinvest back into the team again. So it goes round. So that's what the ultimate position that we're trying to get to. And we touched on the point, of a team and how we get our team really working. So there needs to be good leadership. So during this transition through mastery, niche, as an owner, it will be working on leadership skills and your techniques and what makes a good leader. The team really needs a common goal, and in terms of sporting analogies, there's certainly, I've had a presentation by Sir Clive Woodward when England won the Rugby World Cup, and that was the goal of the team, was to win the Rugby World Cup. On Sunday night, the goal of the English football team is going to be to win the Euros. So, what is the goal that the team is all striving to achieve? Because you're more likely to get unity in your team if you can do that. What are the rules of the game? How do we work together as a team? Referring back to the England rugby team, they put their own rules together. This is what's acceptable behavior. This isn't. And one of their rules was, if the meeting was 10 o'clock and you weren't there, the door was locked and you didn't get in. That was part of your commitment to the team, was turn up on time. So it's making sure we've got how we're going to work effectively as a team. Action plan, ultimately we've got a goal. We know where we want to go and achieve what we want to achieve, how we're going to do it. What's the plan that's going to support that? We do need to support risk taking as we get bigger and we get employees in our team. Why? Because that's when they'll start to learn and grow. If we don't, we're just going to stay where we are. There has to be an element of managing that risk, but ultimately we need to encourage and support risk taking. If we've got a team, we need 100% inclusion. We need everybody involved. We need everybody participating to make it work. There's no point in having 5 in your team and 2 or 3 are carrying most of the work. That isn't going to work. It's unlikely you're going to get to achieve the goals that you want. Ongoing training for you as the leader, the owner of the business, is really important, because your role's transitioning. You've now, instead of maybe dealing with a lot sales and marketing when the business was growing, it's about leadership and team. So that's important, but also identifying in your team what level they're at, if they need skills to grow, that you're actually providing that for them. And most importantly, last and not least, is communication. We need to make sure we understand how it's best to communicate with everyone on the team, and that we're doing that effectively and consistently. So in terms of, that 6-step process, hopefully that's now giving you a really good overview of how we can actually structure the growth within a business. How long does that take? With coaching, with focus, with commitment, 3 to 5 years, businesses can get through to a position where the team is in place and the owner's running the team, so that the owner can take 2 months off. That would be an ideal objective for some of my clients. Get to a position where I can step out of the business and, go on a cruise for 2 months, and the business is actually growing while I'm away. So, it's important that we try and get there. We put that stability in place. We get the consistency and the cash flow through niche, the power of the 5 ways formula, systemize, leverage the business, try to reduce dehumanization, get a good team in place. And that's where we start to get synergy. The business is working really well. It may be for some clients they're looking at one particular operation. Once they get that working really well, they want to replicate it. They want to go another part of the country and replicate that. Sometimes you might want to look at a licensing or franchising model. So you've got options for you as the business owner. So just the last thing I want to leave you with before we leave today, and before I take a few questions, is there's opportunity out there. And when the coronavirus and lockdown first happened, crisis, there was a term, and it's part of Chinese philosophy, out of every crisis there's opportunity. And we're seeing that now as the economy is bouncing back. We're certainly seeing that in a lot of sectors around the home improvements, but there are lots of opportunities out there for everyone within the marketplace. We're going to see things grow. The question is, are you prepared, and are you above the line? Are you going to step up and take accountability and responsibility and actually take some of those opportunities? And if you don't, what's the implications? So we talked about earlier about a growth, and it's important that we're on a growth trajectory, because if we're not growing, we're dying. So, you know, within your business, the things that you're doing, hopefully we've got a growth trajectory, you know, and that might be steady growth, and we're heading in that direction, and we can see that happening. But what's going to happen when we're against that trajectory is that the white dots are representing opportunities that we can see. And those opportunities are just outside that trajectory we're on. So we're going on a growth and we're happily moving along this trajectory. There's an opportunity. And the question is, do you take it? And if you don't take it, the next time an opportunity comes along, it's probably going to be just a little bit further away. And it's the next time a little bit further away. And if we keep going, no, we're going to stay as we are, we're not going to take these opportunities, then, you know, this over a period of time, and, you know, this might be a 90-day, you know, certainly a lot of planning I do with my clients is around 90-day planning cycles. If we're not taking these opportunities as they arise, they keep getting further away from us, then we get to a point where at the end of a period of time, we've got this gap. And this is another way that, you know, we look at in terms of an opportunity cost. So if you're on that growth trajectory and there are opportunities out there, you know, what is your mindset? Are you making excuses not to take those opportunities, going below that point of power, or are you going to reach out and grab them? Because the longer you don't, the longer you leave it to grab them, the further away they get. And just think about it, if you've taken all these opportunities in terms of a trajectory, then, you know, that blue line would be tracking that white line. You'd be on a much steeper trajectory and you'd be achieving that growth much quicker. So thank you for your time. The last point there is that from the slide is, you know, if you see an opportunity or you've created an opportunity, take it. On that end, you know, Jim Rohn quote, never wish life were easier, wish that you were better. He goes on to say, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. So he's a big advocate of self-discipline. Strongly recommend, if you know, you want anything around discipline, personal motivation, any of Jim Rohn's audio books, absolutely brilliant. There is a one-to-one complimentary strategy session, so hopefully you've taken some great notes. Hopefully you've got lots of actions. I'll take a few questions now, but through Gail, you'll be able to book some time with me if you want at a later stage, and I can go through those in a bit more detail with you. So just a few minutes over, but thanks for your time, and I'll just stop the recording, and then we can go to some questions if you have them. So thank you.